The hand was already in the air. Will Smith had extended it the moment Keanu Reeves crossed the stage. Smooth, confident, that unmistakable Will Smith energy filling the room the way it always did. The audience at Jimmy Kimmel Live was already on their feet. 2 icons, 1 couch. This was supposed to be the easiest television moment of the year. Keanu reached the couch. He looked at Will's outstretched hand, and he raised his own palm. Slowly, quietly, fingers spread. Stat. Not a flinch, not a hesitation. A deliberate, calm refusal. The audience laughter died mid-breath. Jimmy Kimmel, already leaning forward with a grin locked on his face, went very still. Will Smith's arm stayed in the air for 1 second, 2 seconds, before dropping back to his lap. His smile didn't break, but something moved behind his eyes. Something old. Keanu sat down without a word. For a moment, no one moved. The studio held 300 people, and the silence was total. A producer somewhere backstage could be heard saying something sharp and urgent into a headset. The cameras kept rolling because nobody knew what else to do. Then Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a single folded piece of paper, placed it on the desk between them, didn't push it toward Will, didn't explain it. Just set it down the way you set down something heavy that you've been carrying for a long time. Will looked at the paper, then at Keanu. "Before we do anything else," Keanu said, his voice low, steady, the way it always is, like a man who has decided something and is at peace with it. "I need you to read that. Right here. In front of everyone watching tonight." Will Smith didn't move. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The microphone caught it anyway. "From someone who's been trying to reach you for 2 years, Keanu said. "Someone whose life you saved, and then disappeared on." But that moment didn't start there. To understand why Keanu Reeves, the most private, most quietly decent man in Hollywood, chose a live television stage to deliver a folded piece of paper to one of the most famous men on earth, you have to go back. Not to that studio. Not to that night. You have to go back to a city Keanu had never visited, and a story Will Smith had never told a single soul. If you've never heard this story before, stay with us, because what happened next silenced an entire studio and reminded 30 million viewers why the things we do when no one is watching are the only things that truly matter. The paper sat on that desk like it had weight beyond its size. Kimmel glanced at it, then at Will, then at Keanu. His instinct was to speak, to fill the silence the way a host is trained to do, but something stopped him. The same something that had stopped the entire studio. The sense that whatever was happening on this stage right now was not his to interrupt. Will Smith reached out and picked up the paper. He didn't open it. Not yet. He held it between both hands, looking at Keanu the way you look at someone when you're trying to decide whether you're ready for what they're about to hand you. "You could have called me," Will said quietly. "She tried that," Keanu replied. "For 2 years." Will's jaw tightened. Something shifted in his posture. The performer disappeared, and what was left was just a man, sitting in a chair, holding a piece of paper he wasn't sure he could open in front of 300 people and every camera in the building. He opened it anyway. The audience watched his face. That was all anyone could do. Watch Will Smith's face as his eyes moved across whatever was written on that page. Watch the moment his expression stopped being composed. Watch the exact second. You could see it happen, when the words landed somewhere deep and old and unguarded inside him. He read it once. Then he read it again. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. For a moment, no one moved. But that moment, the paper, the palm, the silence, none of it started in that studio. It started 35 years earlier, on an October night in Philadelphia, in an alley between two buildings that no longer exist, where a 20-year-old kid with no money and no fame and no reason to stop, stopped anyway. Will Smith in 1989 was not a movie star. He was not the Fresh Prince. He was not anyone the world had heard of yet. He was a young man from West Philadelphia with a gift for making people laugh and a future that existed only in his own stubborn imagination. The deal for the show had been signed, but it hadn't aired. He was still nobody, still invisible, still just a kid walking to his car after a late recording session, past shuttered storefronts and orange streetlights, on a street that felt entirely empty. Until it wasn't. He heard it before he saw it. A sound from the narrow gap between two buildings. Low, labored, wrong in the way that certain sounds are wrong at night when a street is empty and no one else is around to hear them. Will slowed. Stopped. Every instinct a young man develops growing up in a city told him to keep walking. It was late. It was dark. Whatever was in that alley was not his business. He turned toward it anyway. She was sitting against the brick wall with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold something in. 16 years old. A winter coat 2 sizes too big. A bag of groceries split open beside her. Canned goods and a loaf of bread scattered across the wet ground. An orange rolling slowly toward the gutter. There was a gash above her left eyebrow, dark and still bleeding, where her head had met the wall when she went down. She looked up at Will, and she said the only thing she had left. "Please don't walk past me." Will Smith crouched down beside her, right there on the ground. Her name was Diane. She had been walking home from her after-school job at a pharmacy 3 blocks away, when 2 men came from behind, grabbed her bag, and shoved her hard into the wall when she resisted. They took nothing, she had nothing to take, and ran. She had been sitting in that alley for 20 minutes, too dizzy to stand, waiting for someone to come. Dozens of people had passed the mouth of that alley. Will was the first one who looked in. He pulled off his jacket without thinking and pressed the sleeve against the cut above her eye. He talked to her, not about anything important, just kept his voice steady and present, kept her eyes open and focused on his face. When a car rolled slowly past the alley entrance, he stood and stepped into the street and flagged it down with both arms. He made the driver stop at a payphone half a block away and call 911 himself because he would not leave Diane alone in that alley to do it. He sat back down beside her on the cold ground. And he stayed. The ambulance came 7 minutes later. Will stood back while the paramedics worked. He watched them check her eyes, stabilize her head, ask her questions she answered slowly but clearly. The bleeding had slowed. She was going to be all right. He could see that now. The particular way a paramedic's shoulders drop slightly when the situation is serious but not catastrophic. One of the medics turned and looked at him. "You with her?" "No," Will said. I heard her." The medic nodded, looked at him for a moment the way people look at something they don't see very often, then turned back to Diane. Will watched them load the stretcher into the ambulance. Diane turned her head and looked at him from the gurney, this stranger in a torn jacket who had sat on a cold Philadelphia street and held a cloth to her face and refused to leave. She said something. The ambulance doors were closing and the words didn't reach him, but he saw her mouth move. He stood in that alley until the red lights disappeared around the corner. Then he walked to his car, drove home, told no one. Not because it wasn't worth telling, but because in Will Smith's mind, there was nothing to tell. He had heard a sound. He had stopped. He had stayed until help came. That was the whole story. That was simply what you did. He was 20 years old, and he had not yet learned that most people don't stop. He had not yet understood that the ordinary thing he had done that night was, in fact, extraordinary. Fresh Prince aired 8 months later. Then the films came. Then the fame that doesn't stop once it starts. The stone in his chest, the quiet, unexamined assumption that Diane was fine, that she had recovered and moved on and lived a good life, got buried under everything else. Not forgotten. Never quite forgotten. But buried deep enough that he could go years without feeling its weight. He never told Jada. Never told his closest friends. Never mentioned it in 30 years of interviews that asked him everything about everything. Some things you carry alone. Not out of shame. Not out of pride. Just because they belong to you in a way that words always seem to diminish. Diane Mercer did not forget. She couldn't have forgotten if she tried. She had been 16 years old, sitting in an alley, bleeding and alone, and a stranger had sat down beside her on cold concrete and pressed his jacket against her face and talked to her in a steady voice until the ambulance came. That kind of thing does not leave a person. It becomes part of the architecture of who they are, the moment the world could have gone one way and went another instead. She recovered fully. The cut healed. She finished school, built a life in Philadelphia, married, 2 children, a classroom of 7th graders she taught English to every morning at a middle school 4 miles from the alley where it happened. She was, by every measure, completely and beautifully fine. But she needed him to know that. She had recognized Will Smith's face 10 years after that night, on a movie poster outside a theater in Center City. She had stood on the sidewalk in the cold and stared at it for a long time. Then she had gone home and written a letter to his production company. Polite. Specific. Careful. She explained who she was and what had happened and why she needed to reach him. No response came. She wrote again the following year, and the year after that. She tried his agency. She tried a fan contact address that turned out to be managed by an intern who apologized and said there was nothing they could do. A journalist she found through a friend got close once, close enough that someone on Will's team apparently received a message, but nothing came through. The world, it turned out, was very good at keeping ordinary people away from famous ones. She had almost accepted that, almost made peace with it, almost decided that perhaps the knowing was enough, that she knew who he was and what he had done, and maybe that was all the closure the story required. Then her son sat down across from her at the kitchen table one evening with his laptop open and said one name, Keanu Reeves. He had found an interview, recent, quiet, not widely circulated, in which Keanu had spoken about Will Smith in a way that suggested something beyond professional acquaintance. Something that sounded like genuine friendship. Something that sounded like access. Her son had already drafted the letter. He just needed her to say yes. Keanu Reeves read the letter on a Tuesday morning in early October. His assistant had flagged it from a charitable outreach address, the one real human beings occasionally reached through a chain of connections long enough that only the genuinely determined ever completed it. Most letters that arrived there were worthy and forgettable. This one was neither. He read it once standing up. Then he sat down and read it again. The letter was not dramatic. Diane's son had written it plainly, the way you write something when the truth is strong enough to carry itself without decoration. It described his mother, the alley, the October night in 1989, the jacket pressed to her forehead, the voice that kept her present until the ambulance came. The 35 years of letters to production companies and agencies that dissolved into silence. The movie poster she had stood in front of on a Philadelphia sidewalk in 1999, recognizing a face she had never been able to name. It ended with a single sentence. She doesn't need anything from him. She just needs him to know that she lived. Keanu set the letter down on his kitchen table and did not move for a long time. He had known Will Smith for years. Not the celebrity, but the man underneath the celebrity. The one who showed up quietly for people when cameras weren't present. The one who called when he said he would call. Keanu knew something about carrying things silently. He knew something about loss that doesn't announce itself, and grief that has no public shape. He understood, in a way not everyone would, exactly what it meant to do a good thing and never know if it had mattered. He picked up his phone. He did not call Will. Not yet. He called Diane. They spoke for 40 minutes. She was calm and clear and grateful in a way that had no performance in it. She told him everything. The alley, the years, the letters, the journalist who almost got through. She told him about her students and her children and the life that had grown from that one October night. She told him she wasn't angry. She just wanted him to know. When they finished, Keanu sat quietly for a moment. Then he told her he had an idea. That it would need to be public. That it would need to be witnessed. And that she would need to trust him completely. She said yes before he finished the sentence. The show never returned to its scheduled format that night. Will Smith walked off that stage and down that aisle and did not stop until he reached row 4, section C, where a woman in a gray blazer stood up to meet him with the patience of someone who had been waiting 35 years and was finally, completely at peace with the time it had taken. They stood in that aisle for a long moment before either of them spoke. Then Will said the only thing that was true. "I never stopped thinking about you." Diane nodded. "I know," she said. "I know you didn't." He held her photograph, the one her son had included with the letter. A blurred, disposable camera image from the ambulance bay that night. A 20-year-old kid in a torn jacket, standing on a dark Philadelphia street. And he could not speak for a long time. The audience did not sit down. Nobody moved. 300 people stood and watched something real happen in a room built entirely for performance. Keanu Reeves remained at the edge of the stage. Still, watching. This moment was not his. He had simply carried it across 35 years of distance and set it down where it belonged. Will Smith framed that photograph the following week. It hangs in the hallway of his home, not in an office, not behind glass in a public room. In the hallway outside his children's bedrooms, where he walks past it every single day. Because some things deserve to be carried where you can always see them. Because the 20-year-old who stopped in that alley deserves to be remembered by the man he became. And because kindness, quiet, witnessed by no one, asking nothing in return, has a way of finding its way home, even when it takes 35 years to get there.